The sun had just set, casting a warm orange hue across the tranquil Japanese countryside. The narrow road winding through the dense forest was enveloped in the soft, lingering light of dusk. Tall, ancient trees lined either side of the road, their gnarled branches forming a natural tunnel that seemed to close in as darkness approached. The chirping of cicadas filled the air, a familiar sound that slowly gave way to the whispers of the night. As the last rays of sunlight disappeared behind the mountains, the forest was plunged into an eerie silence. The only light now came from the occasional flickering of fireflies and the dim glow of the car's headlights cutting through the thickening darkness. Hiroshi Nakamura, a middle-aged man with a weary face, gripped the steering wheel tightly. He glanced at the rearview mirror, his eyes flickering with a mix of apprehension and curiosity. Beside him sat his younger brother Kenji, whose eyes were fixed on the road ahead, oblivious to the unease that seemed to grip Hiroshi. They were on their way to their family's old summer home, a place they hadn't visited in years. The house, nestled deep within the forest, held many childhood memories, but tonight it felt like a journey into the unknown. The car's engine hummed softly as they drove deeper into the forest. The road ahead was dark and winding, and Hiroshi couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. He glanced again at the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something lurking in the shadows behind them. But there was nothing, just the empty road stretching out behind them. "Are you all right, Hiroshi?" Kenji asked, noticing his brother's distracted demeanor. "Yeah, I'm fine," Hiroshi replied, forcing a smile. "Just tired, I guess." Kenji nodded and turned his attention back to the road. The silence between them was heavy, filled with unspoken words and memories of the past. As they approached a sharp bend in the road, the headlights briefly illuminated an old signpost. It was rusted and barely legible, but Hiroshi recognized it immediately. They were close to the house. The car rounded the bend, and there it was, the old summer home, standing silent and forlorn in the middle of a small clearing. The once vibrant garden was now overgrown with weeds, and the paint on the house was peeling and faded. Hiroshi parked the car and turned off the engine. The sudden silence was almost deafening, and for a moment, neither of them moved. "This place hasn't changed much," Kenji said, breaking the silence. "Yeah," Hiroshi agreed, though he couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. There was something about the house that felt different, almost oppressive. They got out of the car and began unloading their bags. As Hiroshi carried his bag towards the front door, he felt a sudden chill run down his spine. He turned around, his eyes scanning the dark forest. Again, there was nothing, just the quiet, still night. They entered the house, and a musty smell greeted them. The interior was dimly lit, the furniture covered in white sheets. Hiroshi switched on a light, and the room was bathed in a soft, yellow glow. The house felt eerily quiet, as if it had been waiting for them. Kenji walked over to the fireplace and began to clear away the dust and cobwebs. Hiroshi wandered through the house, memories flooding back with every step. He found himself in the living room, staring at an old family photo on the wall. It was a picture of their parents, taken many years ago. Hiroshi felt a pang of sadness. Their parents had passed away in a car accident when they were still young. "Hiroshi, can you help me with this?" Kenji's voice broke through his thoughts. He turned and saw Kenji struggling with a heavy wooden chest. Together, they managed to move it and set it down in the corner of the room. "Thanks," Kenji said, wiping the sweat from his brow. "No problem," Hiroshi replied, but his mind was still elsewhere. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. They spent the next hour cleaning and organizing the house. As night fell, they decided to call it a day and get some rest. Hiroshi lay in his old bed, staring up at the ceiling. The events of the day played over and over in his mind. Just as he was about to drift off to sleep, he heard it, a soft, almost imperceptible whisper. He sat up, his heart pounding in his chest. The room was dark, but he could just make out the shape of the door. The whisper came again, this time clearer. It sounded like a woman's voice, calling his name. Hiroshi. He felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead. Slowly, he got out of bed and walked towards the door. The whispering stopped, replaced by an eerie silence. He opened the door and stepped into the hallway. The house was dark and silent, but he could feel a presence, something watching him. He walked down the hallway, his footsteps echoing softly. As he reached the living room, he saw a shadowy figure standing by the fireplace. He froze, his breath caught in his throat. The figure turned slowly, and Hiroshi felt a chill run down his spine. It was a woman, her face pale and ghostly, her eyes hollow and empty. She raised a hand and pointed towards the door. Hiroshi felt a sudden urge to run, but his feet were rooted to the spot. "Leave," she whispered, her voice echoing through the room. "Leave this place." Hiroshi stumbled backwards, his heart racing. He turned and ran back to his room, slamming the door shut behind him. He leaned against the door, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps. What had he just seen? Was it a ghost, or was his mind playing tricks on him? He didn't sleep that night, his mind too filled with fear and confusion. When morning came, he told Kenji about what he had seen. But Kenji dismissed it as a bad dream. "You were just tired, Hiroshi," he said. "This house can be a bit creepy at night, but there's nothing to be afraid of." Hiroshi wanted to believe him, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. As the day wore on, the events of the night before seemed to fade, replaced by the tasks at hand, but the memory of the ghostly figure stayed with him, a dark shadow lurking at the edge of his thoughts. That evening, they decided to take a drive into town to get some supplies. As they drove down the narrow, winding road, Hiroshi felt a sense of relief. The forest didn't seem as menacing in the daylight, and the drive gave him a chance to clear his mind. But as they neared the bend in the road where they had seen the old signposts, Hiroshi felt a sudden chill. He glanced in the rearview mirror and saw it, a shadowy figure standing by the side of the road, watching them. He slammed on the brakes, and the car skidded to a stop. "What's wrong?" Kenji asked, startled. "Did you see that?" Hiroshi asked, his voice trembling. There was someone standing by the road. Kenji looked back, but there was nothing there. "Hiroshi, there's no one there," he said. "You're just tired." Hiroshi shook his head, but he couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. He started the car again and drove on, his eyes blinking to the rearview mirror every few seconds. When they returned to the house, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the clearing. Hiroshi felt a sense of dread as they approached the house, but he tried to push it aside. They unloaded the car and went inside, the familiar musty smell greeting them. As night fell, the house seemed to come alive with shadows. Hiroshi couldn't shake the feeling that they were not alone. He kept hearing whispers, faint and distant, but always there, just at the edge of his hearing. He sat in the living room, staring at the old family photo. The memories of his parents flooded back, bringing with them a wave of sadness. He missed them terribly, and he couldn't help but wonder if their spirits were still here, watching over the house. As the night wore on, the whispers grew louder. Hiroshi felt a chill run down his spine as he realized that they were not alone. The ghostly figure he had seen the night before was back, standing in the corner of the room, watching him. He stood up, his heart pounding in his chest. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice trembling. "What do you want?" The figure didn't answer. Instead, it raised a hand and pointed towards the door. "Leave," it whispered. "Leave this place." Hiroshi felt a wave of fear wash over him. He turned and ran out of the room, his mind racing. He had to get out of the house, away from the ghostly presence that seemed to haunt every corner. He found Kenji in the kitchen, preparing a late-night snack. "We have to leave," Hiroshi said, his voice shaking. "There's something in this house, something evil." Kenji looked at him, concern etched on his face. "Hiroshi, calm down," he said. "There's nothing here. You're just tired." Hiroshi shook his head. "No, I saw it. There's a ghost, a woman. She wants us to leave." Kenji sighed. Hiroshi, you need to rest. You're not thinking clearly. But Hiroshi couldn't shake the feeling that they were in danger. He knew they had to leave, but he couldn't convince Kenji. He felt a sense of helplessness wash over him as he realized that they were trapped in the house, surrounded by shadows and whispers. That night, Hiroshi didn't sleep. He sat in his room, listening to the whispers that seemed to come from every corner. He could feel the presence of the ghostly woman, watching him, waiting. As the first light of dawn began to filter through the windows, Hiroshi made a decision. They had to leave, no matter what. He got up and went to find Kenji, determined to convince him to leave the house. But as he reached Kenji's room, he saw the ghostly figure standing at the foot of Kenji's bed. Hiroshi felt a wave of fear wash over him as he realized that the ghost was real, and it was not going to let them leave. The ghost turned to him, its hollow eyes staring into his soul. "Leave," it whispered, its voice echoing through the room. "Leave this place." Hiroshi backed away, his heart pounding in his chest. He had to get Kenji out of the house, away from the ghostly presence that seemed to haunt every corner. He ran to Kenji's side and shook him awake. "Kenji, wake up, we have to go," he said, his voice filled with urgency. Kenji groaned and rubbed his eyes. "What's going on?" he asked, still half asleep. "The ghost, it's here, we have to leave now," Hiroshi said, pulling Kenji out of bed. They grabbed their bags and ran out of the house, not looking back. As they drove away, Hiroshi glanced in the rearview mirror one last time. The ghostly figure was standing in the doorway, watching them go. Hiroshi felt a sense of relief as they left the house behind. But he knew that the experience would stay with him forever. He had seen the ghostly presence that haunted the house, and he knew that it would always be a part of his memories. As they drove away, the forest seemed to close in behind them, the shadows growing longer and darker. Hiroshi couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, even as they left the house far behind. The road ahead was long and winding, and Hiroshi knew that they had a long journey ahead of them. But he was determined to leave the ghostly presence behind to find a new, beginning away from the shadows and whispers that had haunted them. The sun was rising, casting a warm, golden light across the countryside. Hiroshi felt a sense of hope as they drove towards the horizon, leaving the past behind and looking forward to a brighter future. But as he glanced in the rearview mirror, he saw a shadowy figure standing by the side of the road, watching them. Hiroshi's heart skipped a beat as he realized that the ghostly presence was still with them, following them into the future. The whispers were still there, faint and distant, but always there, just at the edge of his hearing. Hiroshi knew that he would never escape the ghostly presence that haunted him, but he was determined to keep moving forward, to find a new, beginning away from the shadows and whispers of the past. As they drove into the distance, the sun rose higher, casting a warm, golden light across the landscape. Hiroshi felt a sense of peace as they left the past behind, but he knew that the ghostly presence would always be a part of his memories, a shadow that would follow him wherever he went. But for now, he was content to drive towards the horizon, looking forward to a new beginning and leaving the shadows of the past behind. The morning sun filtered through the trees as Hiroshi and Kenji continued their drive away from the old summer home. The tension from the previous night still lingered, casting a shadow over the bright day. Kenji tried to lighten the mood, making small talk and pointing out familiar landmarks from their childhood, but Hiroshi remained distant. His mind was replaying the events of the night, the ghostly figure's warning echoing in his thoughts. As they drove further, the landscape gradually changed. The dense forest gave way to rolling hills and open fields, the air growing warmer and the sky clearer. Despite the change in scenery, Hiroshi couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every glance in the rearview mirror sent a shiver down his spine, the memory of the ghost's hollow eyes still fresh. "Maybe we should take a break," Kenji suggested, noticing Hiroshi's distraction. "There's a small town up ahead. We can stop for lunch and get some rest." Hiroshi nodded, grateful for the suggestion. They pulled into a quaint town, its streets lined with traditional wooden houses and small shops. The town had a nostalgic charm, reminding Hiroshi of simpler times. They found a small restaurant and settled into a corner booth. As they waited for their food, Hiroshi finally spoke. "Kenji, I can't stop thinking about last night. What if there really is something in that house?" Kenji sighed, leaning back in his seat. "Hiroshi, I know it was scary, but we have to be rational. Maybe it was just our minds playing tricks on us." Hiroshi shook his head, frustration creeping into his voice. "No, it was real. I saw her. She was trying to warn us." Kenji looked at his brother, concern in his eyes. "All right, let's say she was real. What do? We can't just ignore it." Hiroshi appreciated Kenji's willingness to listen. "We need to understand why she's there. Maybe there's something we can do to help her, to put her spirit to rest." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of their food. As they ate, they discussed their plan. They decided to visit the local library, hoping to find any records or stories about the house and its history. The library was a short walk from the restaurant, its exterior, a mix of old and new architecture. Inside, the air was cool and quiet, the smell of aged paper filling the space. They approached the librarian, an elderly woman with kind eyes and a warm smile. "Excuse me, we're looking for information about an old house in the forest. It's been in our family for generations." The librarian nodded, her eyes lighting up with interest. "I know the place you're talking about. It has quite a history. Follow me." She led them to a section of the library filled with old records and documents. She pulled out a thick, leather-bound book and handed it to them. "This is a collection of local folklore and history. You might find something useful in here." Hiroshi and Kenji thanked her and found a quiet corner to sit and read. The book was filled with stories of the town and its surroundings, some dating back centuries. As they flipped through the pages, a particular story caught Hiroshi's eye. It was about a woman named Yuki, who had lived in the forest many years ago. According to the story, Yuki was known for her beauty and kindness, but her life was marked by tragedy. Her husband had disappeared under mysterious circumstances, and she was left alone, haunted by his loss. Villagers reported seeing her wandering the forest, searching for her husband and warning travelers to stay away. Hiroshi felt a chill as he read the story. Could Yuki be the ghost they had seen? He shared the story with Kenji, who looked equally unsettled. If this is her, then maybe she's still looking for her husband. Maybe that's why she's there. Kenji nodded, deep in thought. But why warn us to leave? What danger could there be? Hiroshi had no answers, but he felt a growing determination to find out. They thanked the librarian and left the library, their minds buzzing with questions. As they walked back to their car, Hiroshi noticed an old man sitting on a bench, watching them intently. The man's eyes were sharp and curious, as if he knew something they didn't. Hiroshi hesitated, then approached him. "Excuse me, sir. Do you know anything about the old house in the forest?" The man's gaze didn't waver. "I know many things about that house. It's a place of sorrow and secrets." "Why do you ask?" Hiroshi explained their situation, the ghostly encounter, and the story of Yuki they had read. The old man listened carefully, then nodded slowly. "Yuki's story is well known around here. She was a good woman, but her life was filled with pain. Her husband's disappearance drove her mad with grief." He paused, his expression growing serious. "Some say the forest is cursed, that those who die there are trapped, unable to move on. Yuki's spirit may be one of many, bound to that place by her sorrow." Hiroshi felt a cold weight settle in his chest. "What can we do? How can we help her?" The old man shook his head. "Helping spirits is a delicate matter. Sometimes they need to be reminded of their humanity, their connection to the world of the living. But it's dangerous. Spirits can be unpredictable, especially those consumed by grief." Hiroshi thanked the man and returned to Kenji, who was waiting by the car. What did he say? Kenji asked. Hiroshi relayed the conversation, and they both felt the gravity of their situation. They decided to return to the house, determined to confront Yuki's spirit and find a way to help him move on. As they drove back, the forest loomed ahead, its shadows growing longer in the fading light. The sense of foreboding returned, but this time, Hiroshi felt a resolve to face whatever lay ahead. They arrived at the house as night fell, the moon casting a pale light over the clearing. Hiroshi and Kenji entered the house, the air thick with tension. The whispers started almost immediately, soft and insistent, echoing through the rooms. Hiroshi called out, his voice steady. "Yuki, we know your story. We want to help you." The whispers grew louder, and a chill filled the air. The ghostly figure appeared again, standing by the fireplace. Her eyes were filled with sorrow, her voice a mournful whisper. Leave this place." Hiroshi stepped forward, his heart pounding. "Yuki, we know you're searching for your husband. We want to help you find peace." The ghost's eyes widened, and for a moment she seemed to waver. Hiroshi continued, his voice gentle. "You don't have to be alone anymore. We can help you remember your life, your humanity." Kenji joined him, his voice calm and reassuring. "We're here to help. Please, let us help you." The ghostly figure seemed to soften, her form becoming less defined. The whispers quieted, and for a moment there was a peaceful silence. Then, a soft breeze stirred the air, and the ghost's form dissipated, leaving the room empty. Hiroshi and Kenji stood in the silence, their hearts racing. Had they succeeded? Had Yuki found some measure of peace? As they prepared to leave, Hiroshi felt a sense of closure, a weight lifting from his shoulders. But as they stepped outside, the old man from the town appeared at the edge of the clearing. He watched them with a knowing look, his presence, both comforting and unsettling. "You did well," he said, his voice carrying on the wind. "But remember, the forest holds many secrets. Be careful." Hiroshi nodded, understanding the warning. They got into the car and drove away, the house disappearing behind them. The drive back was quiet, each of them lost in their thoughts. The sun began to rise, casting a golden light over the landscape. Hiroshi glanced in the rearview mirror one last time, half expecting to see the ghostly figure watching them. But there was nothing, just the empty road stretching out behind them. As they drove into the new day, Hiroshi felt a sense of hope. They had faced the darkness and come through it stronger and more united. But the forest and its secrets would always be a part of them, a reminder of the thin veil between the living and the dead. And the whispers, faint and distant, would stay with him, a haunting echo of the past. The moon hung high in the sky, casting a pale, ghostly light over the forest as Hiroshi and Kenji made their way back to the old summer home. The night was silent, save for the occasional rustle of leaves and the distant hoot of an owl. The air was thick with tension, and Hiroshi couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had settled over him. The headlights of their car pierced through the darkness, illuminating the narrow, winding road that led back to the house. The trees on either side of the road seemed to close in, their twisted branches forming a canopy that blocked out the sky. Hiroshi's grip on the steering wheel tightened as they neared the house, his heart pounding in his chest. Kenji sat beside him, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. But Hiroshi could see the worry etched on his face. They had faced the ghost of Yuki and had tried to help her find peace. But Hiroshi couldn't shake the feeling that their task was far from over. As they approached the clearing, where the house stood, Hiroshi felt a chill run down his spine. The house loomed ahead, its windows dark and empty, like eyes watching them approach. He parked the car and turned off the engine. The sudden silence, almost deafening. For a moment, neither of them moved, both lost in their thoughts. "We're back," Kenji said, breaking the silence. Hiroshi nodded, but his mind was elsewhere. The whispers from the night before echoed in his mind, and he couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. They got out of the car and walked towards the house. The front door creaked open, and they stepped inside. The air, thick with the musty smell of old wood and dust. The house was silent, but Hiroshi could feel a presence, something watching them from the shadows. They made their way to the living room, where they had last seen the ghostly figure of Yuki. The room was empty, but the air felt heavy, charged with an unseen energy. Hiroshi called out, his voice steady. "Yuki, we're here to help you. Please, show yourself." For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, the whispers started again, soft and insistent, echoing through the room. The ghostly figure of Yuki appeared by the fireplace, her eyes filled with sorrow. "Leave," she whispered, her voice echoing through the room. "Leave this place." Hiroshi stepped forward, his heart pounding. "Yuki, we want to help you. Please, let us help you find peace." The ghost's eyes widened, and for a moment she seemed to waver. Kenji joined him, his voice calm and reassuring. "We're here to help. Please, let us help you." The ghostly figure seemed to soften, her form becoming less defined. The whispers quieted, and for a moment there was a peaceful silence. Then, a sudden, cold breeze swept through the room, and the ghost's form solidified. Her eyes were filled with anger and fear, and her voice was a desperate cry. "Leave, you must leave, the darkness is coming." Hiroshi felt a chill run down his spine. "What darkness? What are you talking about?" The ghost form flickered, and she pointed towards the window. "Look, see for yourselves." Hiroshi and Kenji turned and looked out the window. In the distance, they could see a dark shape moving through the forest, its form indistinct and menacing. The air grew colder, and the whispers grew louder, filling the room with a sense of dread. Hiroshi turned back to the ghost, his voice urgent. "Yuki, what is that? What is coming?" The ghost's eyes filled with tears, and her voice was a mournful whisper. "The darkness, it is a curse that binds us to this place. You must leave before it takes you too." Hiroshi felt a wave of fear wash over him. "What can we do? How can we stop it?" The ghost form flickered again, and she seemed to struggle to find the words. "You must find the source of the curse. It lies beneath the house." Hiroshi felt a sense of urgency. "We'll do it. We'll find the source and put an end to this." The ghost form began to fade, her voice growing fainter. "Hurry, there is not much time." As the ghost disappeared, Hiroshi and Kenji exchanged a look of determination. They knew what they had to do. They made their way to the basement, the air growing colder with each step. The basement was dark and damp, the walls covered in moss and cobwebs. Hiroshi felt a sense of foreboding as they descended the stairs, the whispers growing louder. They reached the bottom of the stairs and found themselves in a small, dimly lit room. In the center of the room was an old wooden chest, its surface covered in strange symbols. Hiroshi approached the chest, his heart pounding. He could feel a dark energy emanating from it, a sense of malevolence that sent chills down his spine. He reached out and touched the chest, and a jolt of cold energy shot through him. He pulled back, his hand trembling. "This is it," he said, his voice trembling. "This is the source of the curse." Kenji nodded, his face pale. "What do we do now?" Hiroshi took a deep breath, steeling himself. "We have to open it. We have to find out what's inside." He reached out again, his hand steady this time, and lifted the lid of the chest. Inside, they found an old, leather-bound book, its pages filled with strange symbols and drawings. Hiroshi picked up the book, and a wave of dark energy washed over him. He could feel the malevolence emanating from the pages, a sense of dread that made his skin crawl. "We have to destroy this," he said, his voice steady. "It's the only way to break the curse." Kenji nodded, his face set with determination. "Let's do it." They took the book upstairs and placed it in the fireplace. Hiroshi struck a match and set the book on fire. The flames consumed the pages, and a dark smoke filled the room. The whispers grew louder, and the house seemed to tremble. Then, as the last page turned to ash, the whispers stopped, and the air grew still. The sense of malevolence lifted, and Hiroshi felt a sense of relief wash over him. They had done it. They had broken the curse. The ghostly figure of Yuki appeared one last time, her form peaceful and serene. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice filled with gratitude. "Thank you for freeing me." Hiroshi felt a sense of peace as he watched the ghost fade away. Her spirit finally at rest, he turned to Kenji, a smile on his face. "We did it," he said, his voice filled with relief. "We finally did it." Kenji nodded, a smile spreading across his face. "Yeah, we did." As they left the house, the first light of dawn began to filter through the trees. The forest seemed brighter, the shadows less menacing. Hiroshi felt a sense of hope as they walked towards the car. They had faced the darkness and come through it stronger and more united. As they drove away, Hiroshi glanced in the rearview mirror one last time. The house stood silent and empty, its windows reflecting the light of the rising sun. He knew that the forest and its secrets would always be a part of them. But he also knew that they had the strength to face whatever lay ahead. The road ahead was long and winding, but Hiroshi felt a sense of peace as they drove towards the horizon. The past was behind them, and the future stretched out ahead, filled with endless possibilities. As they drove into the new day, Hiroshi felt a sense of hope and determination. They had faced the darkness and come through it, and he knew that they could face whatever challenges lay ahead. The whispers were gone, replaced by the sounds of the morning birds and the rustle of leaves in the breeze. Hiroshi felt a sense of closure as they left the forest behind, the dark memories fading with each passing mile. They had faced their fears and found the strength to overcome them. And Hiroshi knew that they would carry that strength with them into the future. As they drove towards the horizon, the sun rising higher in the sky, Hiroshi felt a sense of peace and contentment. They had faced the darkness and come through it, and he knew that they could face whatever challenges lay ahead. The road was long and winding, but Hiroshi felt a sense of hope as they drove towards the horizon. The future bright and filled with endless possibilities. They had faced their fears and found the strength to overcome them. And Hiroshi knew that they would carry that strength with them into the future. No matter what challenges lay ahead, the moon had risen high in the sky, casting its cold, pale light over the forest. Hiroshi and Kenji stood in front of the old summer home, the shadows of the trees stretching long and dark around them. The air was thick with a sense of finality. The whispers that had haunted them for so long now silent. They had broken the curse, or so they believed. But the feeling of unease remained, a persistent chill that refused to leave Hiroshi's bones. "We need to be sure," Hiroshi said, his voice barely more than a whisper. Kenji nodded, understanding the unspoken fear that lingered between them. They entered the house one last time, the wooden floorboards creaking under their feet. The air inside was colder than outside, as if the house itself was holding its breath. Hiroshi felt a familiar shiver run down his spine as they made their way to the living room. The fireplace, now cold and dark, stood as a silent witness to their ordeal. Hiroshi's eyes were drawn to the spot where Yuki's ghost had appeared. It was empty now, but he couldn't shake the feeling that they were not alone. "Let's check the basement again," Hiroshi suggested, his voice echoing in the silent room. Kenji agreed, and they made their way down the narrow staircase. The basement was just as they had left it. The chest now nothing more than a pile of ash, but the oppressive feeling of darkness was gone, replaced by a strange sense of calm. Hiroshi felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe they really had done it. As they turned to leave, a soft sound caught Hiroshi's attention. It was a faint, almost imperceptible whisper, coming from the corner of the room. He froze, his heart pounding in his chest. "Kenji, did you hear that?" Kenji nodded, his face pale. They moved towards the corner, the whispers growing louder with each step. It was the same voice they had heard before, but now it was filled with a sense of urgency. "Help, help me!" Hiroshi's blood ran cold. The voice was not Yuki's. It was deeper, more desperate. They reached the corner and found an old wooden door, half hidden by the shadows. It was a door they had never noticed before, its surface covered in strange symbols. Hiroshi felt a sense of dread as he reached for the handle. "Are you sure about this?" Kenji asked, his voice trembling. Hiroshi nodded, his hand steady. "We have to know." He turned the handle and pushed the door open. A rush of cold air hit them, and they stepped into a dark, narrow passage. The walls were damp and covered in moss, the air thick with the smell of decay. The whispers grew louder, echoing off the walls. Hiroshi led the way, his heart pounding in his chest. The passage seemed to go on forever, twisting and turning through the darkness. Finally, they reached the end. The passage opened into a small, circular room, its walls covered in strange symbols and drawings. In the center of the room was a stone altar, and lying on the altar was a book. It was the same book they had burned in the fireplace, now whole and untouched. Hiroshi felt a wave of fear wash over him. "This isn't possible," he whispered. Kenji stepped forward, his eyes wide with disbelief. "We destroyed it. How can it be here?" Hiroshi shook his head, unable to answer. He reached out and touched the book, and a jolt of cold energy shot through him. He pulled back, his hand trembling. "We have to destroy it again," he said, his voice filled with determination. Kenji nodded, and together they lifted the book from the altar. As they did, the whispers grew louder, filling the room with a sense of urgency. They carried the book back through the passage, the whispers following them. When they reached the basement, they placed the book in the center of the room. Hiroshi struck a match and set the book on fire. The flames consumed the pages, and a dark smoke filled the room. The whispers grew louder, and the house seemed to tremble. Then, as the last page turned to ash, the whispers stopped, and the air grew still. The sense of malevolence lifted, and Hiroshi felt a sense of relief wash over him. They had done it. They had broken the curse. The ghostly figure of Yuki appeared one last time, her form peaceful and serene. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice filled with gratitude. "Thank you for freeing me." Hiroshi felt a sense of peace as he watched the ghost fade away. Her spirit finally at rest, he turned to Kenji, a smile on his face. "We did it," he said, his voice filled with relief. "We finally did it." Kenji nodded, a smile spreading across his face. "Yeah, we did." As they left the house, the first light of dawn began to filter through the trees. The forest seemed brighter, the shadows less menacing. Hiroshi felt a sense of hope as they walked towards the car. They had faced the darkness and come through it stronger and more united. As they drove away, Hiroshi glanced in the rearview mirror one last time. The house stood silent and empty, its windows reflecting the light of the rising sun. He knew that the forest and its secrets would always be a part of them. But he also knew that they had the strength to face whatever lay ahead. The road ahead was long and winding, but Hiroshi felt a sense of peace as they drove towards the horizon. The past was behind them, and the future stretched out ahead, filled with endless possibilities. As they drove into the new day, Hiroshi felt a sense of hope and determination. They had faced the darkness and come through it, and he knew that they could face whatever challenges lay ahead. The whispers were gone, replaced by the sounds of the morning birds and the rustle of leaves in the breeze. Hiroshi felt a sense of closure as they left the forest behind, the dark memories fading with each passing mile. They had faced their fears and found the strength to overcome them. And Hiroshi knew that they would carry that strength with them into the future. As they drove towards the horizon, the sun rising higher in the sky, Hiroshi felt a sense of peace and contentment. They had faced the darkness and come through it, and he knew that they could face whatever challenges lay ahead. The road was long and winding, but Hiroshi felt a sense of hope as they drove towards the horizon. The future bright and filled with endless possibilities. They had faced their fears and found the strength to overcome them. And Hiroshi knew that they would carry that strength with them into the future. No matter what challenges lay ahead,